You're listening to Dark Rain Chronicles. The rain hides many things, but it also remembers. Secrets washed away, voices swallowed by the storm. These are the stories it brings back, and tonight, you will hear them. My windows, my very balcony, they became bars, caging me on the summit floor of a building I once thought merely old, merely creaky. Never did I anticipate a midnight apparition that would seize my gut with icy fingers, leaving my hands trembling. Never did I conceive of being imprisoned by the view, stranded sky high with no earthly retreat. Yet that's how the haunting began. An ordinary evening folding into night, my arms resting on the cool iron railing, gaze lost in the lunar glow, when a silhouette materialized across the chasm, separating the building's wings. Crowned by the distinct curve of a dark hat, its attention felt like a physical weight. My blood turned to ice, my breath caught, my stare locked onto it, transfixed. Then, like smoke caught in a sudden draft, it dissolved. 6 months I'd called this place home, cultivating a solitary existence within its aged walls. Books were my companions. Parties and gossip held no allure. I dealt in facts, not phantoms. The edifice itself, however, breathed antiquity. Wrought iron twisted like skeletal fingers along the balconies. Paint peeled in leprous patches within the stairwell, and the air hung thick with the ghosts of yesterday's breath. My roost, the highest floor, boasted a balcony facing a twin facade across a narrow court. By day, mere brickwork and vacant windows met my eye. Night, however, painted the scene with a profound and unsettling difference. That first night, it stood there, an ink blot against the gloom on the opposing balcony. No face discernible, just that stark outline beneath the fedora's brim. My throat constricted, dry as desert sand. A palpable scrutiny flowed across the gap, though no eyes were visible. A silent scream died unborn within me. Then it retreated, swallowed by the balcony door's impenetrable darkness. Inside my own apartment, the familiar space felt suddenly alien. I paced, seeking refuge in reason. A neighbor unseen till now. Impossible. The superintendent, when I'd moved in, swore that particular unit was derelict, untouched for years due to water damage and failing bones. A trespasser, perhaps? The thought offered thin comfort against the primal tension coiling deep in my gut. Bolts slid home on the balcony door. Windows were secured with newfound urgency. Sanctuary that night was the living room sofa, bathed in the artificial glare of lamplight, a flimsy defiance against the encroaching dark. The following day, passing the custodian's ground floor office, I floated a casual inquiry about the facing unit. His gaze remained impassive. "Nah," he mumbled, scratching his chin. "That one's cursed, I reckon. Leaks, bad structure. Nobody's touched it." I let the subject drop, but the knot tightened beneath my ribs, the brief exchange leaving a residue of disquiet. Evening draped the city in shades of bruised purple. The balcony door beckoned, a dark mirror reflecting my own apprehension. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Absurd, I chided myself, this creeping paranoia. Yet, as midnight breathed across the rooftops, the pull became irresistible. Stepping outside, the air bit coolly against my skin. Silence reigned. The opposite balcony stood vacant, inert under the moonlight, a fragile tendril of relief unfurled within me. Minutes passed in watchful stillness before I retreated indoors. Later, sleep shattered abruptly. A delicate tap, tap, tap resonated, seemingly from my window. Impossible. Here, on the uppermost floor, there were no ledges, no fire escapes, nothing to offer purchase. A prickling unease crawled over my skin. I rose from bed, a statue carved from tension. The sound persisted for a few heartbeats, then ceased. Stealthily, soundlessly, I approached the window, parting the curtain a mere hair's breadth. Empty night stared back. A wave of visceral anxiety washed through me, cold and nauseating. I checked the window lock again, straining my ears against the profound stillness that followed. Silence. The next morning, I tried to bury the unease beneath the mundane. Work, routine, the familiar rhythm of the city. But returning home, the apartment felt charged, expectant. I checked the balcony door, scanned the street below. A pantomime of normalcy. Attempting distraction with a film proved futile. Relaxation remained elusive. Then, precisely at midnight, the tapping returned. Louder this time, sharper, like knuckles rapping insistently on the pane. I jolted from the sofa, heart leaping. Raced to the window, flung back the curtain, and confronted only my own haunted reflection, pale and wide-eyed in the glass. Adrenaline surged, sharp and metallic. I edged towards the balcony door, easing it open. The night air possessed a new, predatory chill. My gaze instinctively sought the opposing balcony, and found it, the hatted silhouette, perched impossibly on the very edge of the railing, facing me. My mouth turned to dust, my limbs threatening to liquefy. It held its pose, an obsidian statue radiating unwavering focus. Then, with unnerving fluidity, it stepped back, melting from the ledge, out of sight. My heart battered my ribs. A faint metallic clink echoed across the void, sharp and distinct, followed by an unnerving, profound silence. Dawn revealed a small trespasser on the concrete floor of my balcony, an ancient key, its edges furred and softened with deep orange rust. Origin unknown, utterly inexplicable. Standing at the railing, I peered across the chasm. The facing balcony door remained shut, the space desolate, devoid of life. A ridiculous notion surfaced, dropped from above. But nothing resided above my airy, only open sky. Later that night, sleep was a fugitive state. Around 2, the tapping resumed, frantic now, demanding attention. Phone clutched, its beam slicing the darkness. I crept towards the window. Breath hitched in my throat. My fingers brushed the cold glass. The rapping ceased instantly, as if acknowledging my touch. Tremors seized my hand as I pulled the curtain aside. Void. A ragged sigh escaped my lips, then a soft thump from the balcony. I burst through the door, phone lights sweeping the gloom. My foot connected with something small on the ground, a relic of a metal toy car, ravaged by rust, one wheel lost to the ravages of time. Lifting it, flakes of decay powdered my palm. I placed it carefully on the railing, mind reeling, trying to fathom its impossible arrival. My gaze flicked across the way, a flicker of movement behind the grimy glass door opposite, the silhouette, retreating into deeper darkness. Subsequent nights delivered more rusted tributes, a grotesquely bent spoon, a watch face shattered like a frozen pond, eyeglass frames stripped bare of their lenses. Each arrival was heralded by the spectral summons at my window, the taps or knocks growing bolder. Anxiety became a constant companion, tightening its suffocating grip around my chest. Sleep offered no escape, merely troubled dreams punctuated by imagined sounds. Every sunset now signaled the start of the vigil, my neck and shoulders locked in perpetual tension. I sought counsel from a long-term resident down the hall, a man whose tenure in the building far exceeded mine. Asked about the vacant unit, any oddities he might have noticed. A shrug. Place just groans a lot, he offered casually. Normal for its age. The rusted offerings remained my secret. My sanity felt too fragile a thing to risk exposing to skepticism. Later, encountering the maintenance man, brush in hand, diligently painting over the stairwell's decay, I tried again. He echoed the official story, empty for years. Gives off weird vibes sometimes, though, he chuckled, blaming aging plumbing for nocturnal noises. He'd never witnessed entry or exit. I managed a strained nod, the smile feeling like a poorly fitting mask on my face. By the second week, the tapping yielded entirely to solid, demanding knocks against the glass. Each time I'd bolt upright in bed, heart seizing, dash to the window. Only emptiness greeted me. Outside, inevitably, another corroded curio awaited discovery on the balcony floor. The collection grew, housed in a small cardboard box, a disturbing museum of the inexplicable. Logic offered no purchase. My top-floor isolation should have been inviolable. Yet the artifacts materialized, delivered it seemed, by the hatted specter. One night, fueled by bitter coffee and desperation, I became the watcher. Ensconced in darkness, lights extinguished, peering through a narrow slit in the curtains. Around 2 a.m, movement snagged my attention across the chasm. I leaned forward, straining my eyes. The silhouette stood poised on the railing opposite. My muscles locked, breath held captive in my lungs. Then, impossibly, it leapt. A fluid, terrifying arc through the night air to the next balcony along the facade. Then another leap, and another, closing the distance with unnerving grace and silence. The faint thud of landings echoed in the stillness. My breath grew thin. Dizziness swam at the edges of my vision. Consider the police. The thought flickered, immediately extinguished by the chilling certainty of disbelief. How could I explain this? Instead, I remained frozen, a spectator to the impossible ballet. It reached the balcony immediately adjacent to mine. A low scrape of metal on metal reached my ears, a darker, crouched shape near the rails. My hands trembled violently. I didn't dare breathe, didn't dare move. Seconds stretched into an eternity before it simply wasn't there anymore. I sat, paralyzed by fear and disbelief, until the gray, indifferent light of dawn bled into the sky. Sleep was a forgotten country. On my windowsill that morning lay a tarnished, old-fashioned lighter. Swallowing bile, I added it to the growing hoard in the box. Another appeal to the superintendent followed. Check the apartment. Change the locks, please. Vague promises floated back, mentions of scheduling conflicts, his tone laced with thinly veiled impatience. His indifference was a solid wall. Frustration simmered, hot and impotent, leaving me feeling utterly, terrifyingly isolated. Then came the night the barrier was truly tested. A grating sound scraped against my balcony door, sometime near 3 a.m. Scrambling from bed, stumbling into the living room in the dark. The door handle jiggled violently. Reacting on instinct, I slammed on the overhead light. Silence. The rattling ceased instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic drumbeat against the sudden quiet. I stood 10 feet away, phone gripped tight in my hand, yet paralyzed, unable to dial. Waited, listening to the blood roar in my ears. A shadow detached itself from the periphery of the doorframe. It vaulted onto the railing with an eerie, practiced agility. Balanced there for a pregnant second. A soft grunt, an expulsion of breath, barely audible but undeniably present, reached me across the small distance. My stomach revolted. It sprang, landing noiselessly on the neighboring balcony. I watched, numb, as it dissolved once more into the night. My legs finally gave way. I crumpled onto the sofa, drenched in cold sweat. My endurance frayed, snapping under the relentless pressure. A desperate, reckless resolve formed. I had to infiltrate the source. The custodian's master keys, occasionally left unattended in the small maintenance office on the ground floor. I stalked the opportunity like a predator. Midday, the office stood vacant. Heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. A drumbeat of mingled fear and determination. I slipped inside and snatched the heavy ring of keys. This was trespass, potentially madness, but ignorance had become intolerable. I ascended the stairs to the haunted apartment, the corridor lights sputtering overhead like dying synapses. The door itself seemed weary, warped with age and neglect. Holding my breath, I selected a likely key. It slid into the lock and turned with a rusty click. A groan of protesting hinges accompanied the door swinging inward. The air inside hung thick and stagnant, heavy with dust motes dancing in the dim light and the pervasive scent of decay and damp plaster. The living area stood vacant, save for the skeletal remains of 2 broken chairs. A short passage led deeper into the apartment's gloom. I trod carefully over yielding, possibly rotted floorboards, each footstep echoing unnaturally in the dead silence. Reaching the bedroom, I found a closet door slightly ajar. Peering inside revealed shelves laden with forgotten detritus, stacks of yellowed newspapers bound with crumbling twine, disintegrating cardboard boxes, and a chaotic horde of random junk. Much of it was rusted, broken, coated in grime. Recognition jolted through me like an electric shock. Twisted spoons, archaic-looking keys green with verdigris, shreds of indeterminate fabric, a broken buckle. The very twins of the objects that had been appearing, night after night, on my balcony. Adrenaline surged, hot and sharp. This was the nest, the source. My attention turned to the balcony door. It resisted, jammed tight in its frame. Putting my shoulder into it, I forced it open with a screech of tortured metal. Outside, the railing wore a thick shroud of dust and peeling paint flakes. And there, starkly imprinted in the grime, footprints. Recent footprints. My throat clenched tight. Tangible proof. Someone flesh and blood traversed these railings nightly. No phantom, no figment of a stressed mind. This was real. Yet searching the small space revealed no sign of the occupant. No cache of rusted offerings awaiting delivery. No sleeping bag. No hint of habitation beyond the dust disturbances. It was a place merely visited, used as a staging ground. A chilling vulnerability washed over me, standing exposed on this abandoned stage, visible perhaps from countless other windows. I retreated quickly, pulling the stubborn door shut, securing the apartment lock, leaving no sign of my intrusion. Returning the master keys to the office, my hands trembled. burdened by the weight of illicit, terrifying knowledge. That night, I battled the rising tide of panic, clinging desperately to the flimsy fiction of a disturbed prankster, someone merely trying to frighten me. Midnight struck, not with taps, but with furious, hammering knocks on the glass of my balcony door. Urgent, insistent, demanding. I froze mid-step, a current of pure ice flooding my veins. Cautiously, I advanced towards the door. The rapping intensified, a rapid-fire staccato, then a brief, terrifying pause, then resumed with even greater force. With a surge of desperate, adrenaline-fueled bravado, I ripped the curtains aside and recoiled instinctively. The silhouette loomed inches away, pressed hard against the glass, a solid blackness against the ambient city light. Its face remained obscured beneath the perpetual brim of the hat, a featureless, terrifying presence. My pulse detonated, a painful explosion in my chest. We stared, separated only by the thin, fragile pane of glass. It raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, its dark shape stark against the night, pointing directly towards the door handle. My thoughts fractured, scattering like broken glass. I stumbled back, shaking my head mutely, a denial torn from deep within. In a blur of swift economical motion, it pivoted, sprang onto the railing, and was gone. A faint, receding scrape of metal on metal marked its passage into the darkness. Morning yielded another corroded offering left upon my balcony threshold. A pocket knife, its blade half exposed, thick and crusted with angry orange rust. I snatched it up with revulsion, consigned it to the growing collection in the cardboard box, and secured all locks anew. Collapsed on the sofa, breath ragged and shallow, the tension remained an iron band constricting my chest. My head throbbed, my hands unsteady. Later that day, I made one final, futile appeal to the superintendent downstairs. "Inspect the place," I pleaded, my voice tight with desperation. He waved me off, impatience etching deep lines around his mouth, citing schedules and paperwork. I insisted, my voice rising, describing the footprints in the dust on the vacant balcony. "Busy," he snapped, turning away. Fury warred with a crushing helplessness. I retreated, defeated, stomping back to my apartment, unsure where to turn, what else could possibly be done. Now, each night tightens the siege. The figure draws inexorably closer. The knocks grow louder, more demanding. The impossible leaps between balconies have become a terrifyingly familiar prelude. Sunset sickens me, twisting my insides into knots of dread. My windows remain locked, the balcony door secured by bolt and chain. Yet the presence manifests regardless, leaving its cryptic, rusted tributes upon my doorstep. There is no escape. My own apartment has become a cell, high above the unseeing city. Whither this nightly ritual leads, what the silent, hatted entity desires from me, remains shrouded in terrifying ambiguity. But the objects, they whisper of the building's forgotten life, its layered history. Faded labels glimpsed on fragments, archaic address tags clinging to scraps. Keys that might once have turned these very locks generations ago. Relics of a past unearthed, forced upon me piece by rusty piece. A history demanding acknowledgement, refusing to stay buried. I chronicle this now while the fear is fresh, my muscles rigid, my eyes darting constantly towards the balcony door. Midnight approaches like a slow tide. I am waiting. Waiting for the tap, the knock, the inevitable visitation. Sweat slicks my palms, my heart races, a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. A desperate yearning for cessation battles the mundane chains of lease and finance that bind me here. So I remain, trapped in this nocturnal vigil, awaiting the return of the shape in the hat, awaiting the next fragment of history it will deposit on my threshold. How far will it venture? I don't know, but I listen acutely for the whisper of footfalls on metal, for the sharp rap on the glass. I watch the balcony opposite, scanning the shadows for that familiar silhouette. Its gaze, though unseen, is a palpable weight I feel constantly. No one would heed a scream, even if I could find my voice. Thus, I sit in the swallowing dark, hyper-alert, senses stretched taut, anticipating that first contact, and wondering, with a dread that chills deeper than the night air itself, if tonight is the night it finally finds a way inside. Two sharp chimes from the clock, and the familiar cadence began. A weighty tread on concrete, insistent, undeniable. Sleep shattered instantly. This was no phantom conjured by dreams. Upright in bed, pulse a frantic drum against my sternum. I watched the numerals burn faintly. 2 a.m. Precisely. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, pierced the lingering warmth of sleep. Always this hour. My sparse loft swam in shadow, relieved only by the anemic wash of a distant street lamp, slicing through the tall, lean window. Below in the alley, the pacing continued. Back, forth, a steady, unhurried rhythm. Utterly wrong. That passage I knew met only a blind brick wall. There was nowhere to pace. 2. Yet the steps persisted, locked in some inscrutable routine. From my vantage point, the alley remained stubbornly empty, but the clarity of the sound mocked my senses, forcing me to sit there, breath held captive, ears straining for every resonant impact. In that moment, certainty crystallized. This was no trick of the mind. Scarcely a month had passed since I'd taken this minimalist perch, a stone's throw from the office towers that swallowed my days. One large room, stark white walls embracing only necessities, a couch like a shadow, a solitary table and chair, the promise of rest in a bed frame, rudimentary kitchenware. Proximity was the lure, the siren song of a walkable commute. By day, the surrounding streets pulsed with a reassuring rhythm, shoppers weaving through storefronts, the clatter and steam from the corner cafe, the sterile hum of the pharmacy. But night drew a shroud over it all, erasing the bustle, leaving behind a skeletal silence that had initially seemed perfect, a straight, quiet path to work. Tucked behind the building lay the anomaly, a sliver of an alleyway, pinched between brick behemoths, expiring abruptly at an old, impassive wall. A single lamp cast partial, unreliable light into its depths. The agent had waved it off. Just a dead end, a detail I'd filed away until that first Saturday night. Drifting towards sleep, I heard them. Heavy, purposeful footfalls. Late reveler, I'd assumed, until the clock showed 2:01 a.m. and the sound refused to pass, instead locking into its relentless patrol. I rose, peered out. Nothing but shadows and damp concrete. I stared, willing a shape to coalesce, convinced the sheer solidity of the sound demanded a source. But the alley remained vacant. A residue of unease clung to me through the morning light. Downstairs, I found Mateo, the day shift sentinel, polishing the brass door handle. Hear anything odd? At night, I ventured. A slow, considering nod. The steps? Yeah, sometimes. His voice was low. Checked it out myself more than once. Never anybody there. Strange. He shrugged, a gesture meant to dismiss, but his eyes held a flicker of something else. Told the super. Nothing to be done if there's no one making them. Then Elias, preparing to take over the night watch, added his piece, his voice gravelly. Always the same time, isn't it? 2-ish. Heard him too. A knot tightened in my gut. The shared mystery offered no comfort, only deepened the chill. Resolved, I became a creature of the night. Lights extinguished, I stationed myself by the window, a sentinel in my own shadowed space. The loft air grew thick, tasting of dust and anticipation. My phone's clock face became an obsession. Then, precisely at 2:02 a.m., the performance began. Sharp, rhythmic impacts on the pavement below, traversing the alley's length, pivoting, returning. I traced the sound's invisible trajectory, straining to conjure a form from the emptiness. Nothing. Sweat bloomed on my palms, my heart launching itself against my ribs. A primal urge to flee warred with a paralytic curiosity. It was real. Undeniably, impossibly real. Action replaced paralysis. Sweatpants, shoes, phone clutched tight. I descended, the elevator cage amplifying my ragged breathing. Perhaps confronting the source, catching the phantom in the act. Downstairs, Elias presided over the hushed lobby, his weathered face etched with the night's solitude. "You hear it?" I asked, breathless. He nodded grimly. "Right now. But listen, kid," his voice dropped. "You go out there. You won't find a soul." Still, I had to see. He turned the key in the side door, releasing me into the alley's cool, damp embrace. Silence. Absolute. The instant my foot crossed the threshold, the rhythmic pacing ceased as if a switch had been thrown. Elias followed, his flashlight beam cutting nervous arcs through the gloom, illuminating only refuse bins and the impassive brick terminus. We walked its length, peered behind obstacles, scanned for hidden exits. Nothing. A cul-de-sac, sealed and solid. "Echoes in the walls," I offered weakly. He shook his head, the beam steadying on the unyielding brick. "Worked here too long. No secret doors. Let's head back." My loft, once a sanctuary, now felt porous, vulnerable. The daylight routine, shower, coffee, the walk to work, became a fragile shield against the encroaching night. As dusk bled into evening, a familiar tension coiled in my chest, anticipating the 2 o'clock haunting. I armed myself with distractions, headphones flooding my ears with music, podcasts droning into the void. Yet, precisely at 2, a deeper sense knew. Slipping off the headphones confirmed it. The steady, ghostly patrol continued. Back and forth, until the half-hour mark released its grip, fading into the pre-dawn stillness. Desperate for an anchor, I texted Finn. His response was laced with nervous humor. "Sounds spooky. Record it." So I did. Phone perched by the window, voice recorder active from 1:50 a.m. until the silence returned around 2:30. The playback was chillingly clear, the unmistakable sound of heavy footfalls on concrete. Finn listened, admitted it was uncanny, then deflected with theories of plumbing or freak acoustics. My invitation to witness it firsthand was met with laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes, followed by a polite The unease, it seemed, was contagious, even at a distance. Daylight hours became reconnaissance missions. I prowled the building's perimeter, scrutinizing the alley's architecture. A neighboring tower loomed, its windowless flank forming one side of the narrow passage. The wall ending the alley felt ancient, impenetrable. I traced its mortar lines, tapped its bricks, seeking hollowness, finding only dense solidity. Queries to neighbors yielded shrugs, vague recollections, or utter obliviousness. Sleep, right through, one mumbled. Heard something once, maybe. Offered another, uninterested. Julian across the hall listened with polite discomfort, suggesting vagrants before retreating behind a wall of "don't want to dwell on it." His gaze implying I was courting shadows, best left undisturbed. Frustration simmered. Was I the only one tuned to this impossible frequency? Weeks bled into a tense routine. Night after night, lights out, I'd stand vigil at the window. The approach of 1:55 a.m. invariably triggered a physical response. Heart hammering, breath catching. Then, punctually, the solitary march began below. My eyes scanned the dimly lit concrete, desperate for a flicker of movement, a distortion in the shadows. Nothing. Only the sound, crisp and undeniable, mapping its invisible path from end to end, turning, returning. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. My mouth went dry. Logic fractured against the sheer, persistent reality of the unseen walker. A new plan formed. Ambush. If I occupied the space before the appointed hour. Downstairs again, Elias unlocking the side door with a questioning look I ignored. At 1:55 a.m., I stood within the alley itself. The air felt heavy, expectant. The damp concrete smell filled my nostrils. My phone was poised, ready to capture anything. The seconds crawled. 1:58. 1:59. 2 leaped arcs. Silence held sway, broken only by the distant hum of city life. 5 minutes stretched into an eternity of nothing. Defeated, foolish, I retreated. Back in the elevator, ascending. The click of my loft door shutting behind me was the precise cue. Instantly, the familiar heavy tread resumed outside my window. Phone nearly slipping from my grasp, I lunged towards the sound, peering down. Steady, clear, back and forth. A cold sweat broke out as I gripped the sill, shaking. How? My report to Elias the next morning earned only a resigned shrug. Been happening a long time, I hear. Echo, maybe. Who knows? Management, contacted by phone, was equally dismissive. No formal complaints lodged, therefore no cause for investigation. My frustration curdled into a feeling of helpless isolation. An audio file of footsteps, however clear, wasn't proof enough to pierce their bureaucratic indifference. Nightfall ceased to promise rest, becoming instead a prelude to anxiety. Sleep became a strategic retreat, often postponed until after 2:30 a.m., deliberately enduring the phantom patrol just to avoid the jarring awakening. Lying rigid in the dark, I tracked the invisible pacing. My stomach clenched, waiting for the inevitable cessation that signaled a fragile truce until the next night. Another sleepless vigil yielded another desperate tactic: video evidence. Phone propped on the sill, lens aimed squarely at the stage below, recording from 1:50 a.m. I sat back, scarcely breathing, watching the screen. At 2:02 a.m., the familiar sound flooded the microphone. "Show me," I whispered into the tense quiet. "Show me something." The footsteps paced, turned, paced again, then faded around 2:25. Playback offered only maddening confirmation. Pristine audio of the heavy tread, paired with video footage of an utterly vacant, undisturbed alley. A profound weariness set in, mingled with sharp frustration. Moving felt like surrender, yet the nightly dread was corrosive, etching away at my peace. Earplugs became useless wadding. Music, a futile barrier. White noise, merely a backdrop to the insistent rhythm that seemed to bypass hearing altogether, resonating instead like a low thrumming deep within my bones. Enough. One night, raw nerves overriding caution, I waited until 2:10 a.m., the footsteps already echoing in the stairwell as I descended. Pulse frantic, I strode past Elias in the lobby, out the side door, planting myself at the alley's mouth. Silence crashed down again. The performance halted for its audience of one. Signaling to a wary Elias, I advanced deeper into the shadowed passage, phone flashlight carving a weak path. Damp concrete gleamed, reflecting only stray light in the texture of old pavement. No disturbance, no prints in the shallow puddles. I lingered, breathing hard, the smell of wet earth thick in the air. Then slowly, I turned and looked up towards my own window, a distant rectangle of faint light in the brick facade. How could sound so visceral leave no trace? Returning to the lobby, Elias met my gaze with that familiar, weary resignation. Words felt superfluous. Weeks turned, the pattern unbroken. 2 a.m. until roughly 2:30, the invisible sentry marched. Finn did stay over once, crashing on the couch. The footsteps performed on schedule, but he, a profoundly deep sleeper, remained oblivious. He listened to the recording again, sympathized, but admitted the phenomenon didn't burrow under his skin as it did mine. His departure left me once more in solitary witness to the nightly enigma. Acceptance, of a sort, has settled in like fine dust. It's woven into the fabric of inhabiting this space. The doormen offer no theories. Management remains inert. Neighbors cocooned in their own lives. Each night, the clock creeps towards 2, and the familiar knot of anxiety tightens. The footsteps arrive, punctual as ever. They pace their 30-minute circuit. Heavy shoes on concrete, back and forth in the blind alley. Going down silences them, only for the rhythm to resume the moment I return. An unbreakable loop. Attempts to ambush, record visually, rationalize. All have failed. Is it an impossible trick? A quirk of sound trapped between buildings? Or something else? Something that sidesteps explanation? I no longer chase the answer. I remain. I endure the nightly spike of adrenaline, the straining ears, the gaze fixed on an empty, shadow-draped window. I hear the steps, wait for their departure, and then, finally, seek uneasy rest. The Phantom Patrol continues, night after night, and I am simply here, listening. The click of the deadbolt echoed the finality of it as Silas secured the old city workshop one last time, his gaze lingering on the handle's peeling integument before he turned his back. His car sagged with luggage, a scattering of boxes. Behind it idled the rented truck, a hulking shadow filled with the detritus of a former life. A profound weariness settled in his bones, threaded with the sharp wire of apprehension. This was the plan. Shed the city's relentless clamor, the suffocating clutter, and seek refuge in quietude, a place to rebuild from the ground up. Scant weeks prior, a listing had snagged his attention. A forgotten warehouse, cloaked in dust, nestled in some hamlet miles from any artery of consequence. The price felt like a typo, ignored by shrewder buyers. One swift inspection, a handshake, and it was his. An antique dealership, that was the dream. Years spent hawking curios and relics had seeded a quiet passion for the trade. The structure itself was a study in neglect, paint curling like ancient parchment, the roofline canted as if weary, an interior breathing the musty perfume of time and damp timber. Yet, it resonated. A blank slate, scarred, but waiting. The day Silas rolled into the village, time itself seemed viscous, pooling in the narrow main street. A sparse assembly occupied benches, their conversations murmured, unhurried. No one rushed. He eased his car to a halt before the newly acquired property, the engine's sigh fading into the whisper of the breeze. For a long moment, he just sat, absorbing the stillness. The warehouse loomed, older, more skeletal than memory served. Above the entrance, the ghost sign, Corbin's Mercantile, hung askew, a drunken epitaph. Windows stared blankly through shrouds of grime. Porch boards surrendered to rot. A mountain of work, certainly, but that didn't daunt him. The structure's integrity, however, the fear of pouring his meager savings into a collapsing shell, that gnawed. Still, he unfolded himself from the car, stretching, surveying his domain. Across the lane, a neighbor offered a laconic wave. Amiable enough, yet an inexplicable coolness prickled the air, unrelated to the gentle weather. He turned the key, pushed open the groaning front door, and stepped inside. His boots disturbed decades of settled dust, sending motes dancing in the dim light. Shelving, naked and expectant, lined the walls, relics of its mercantile past. Faded receipts and spectral advertisements clung to the counters. The air hung thick and stale, redolent of sodden paper left to fester. Drawn towards the rear, Silas discovered a cramped office space, its single window choked by an overgrown backyard. And there, centered in the ceiling directly above a scarred wooden desk, was a feature he'd inexplicably missed. A trapdoor. Standing on tiptoe, he prodded it with a stray broom handle. It rattled loosely but held fast, stubbornly sealed. A puzzle for another time, he decided. The remainder of the afternoon bled away in the rhythm of unloading, carving out a primitive living space in one corner with a cot, a folding table, the bare essentials. Muscles screamed from the long drive. Surrender felt sensible. Sleep, when sought upon the narrow cot that night, proved elusive. The building wrapped him in an absolute silence, a stark departure from the city's perpetual hum. Initially welcome, the quiet soon became a canvas for the structure's subtle groans, its pops and sighs as old timbers settled. But then, near midnight, a different sound emerged from the stillness above. A soft, dragging friction. It suggested footsteps on dusty floorboards, yet imbued with an unnatural, limping gait, pacing back and forth overhead. Pauses punctuated the rhythm, followed by something akin to a stifled, guttural growl. Silas's heart began a frantic tattoo against his ribs. A cold knot formed low in his gut. Rationality insisted. Raccoon, perhaps, or some feral creature seeking shelter. But the sound possessed a deliberate, heavy quality, far removed from the frantic scuttling of vermin. He lay rigid in the darkness, clutching the thin blanket, his breathing shallow and rapid. Minutes stretched into an eternity before the sounds eventually receded. Sleep remained distant, his throat parched, brow slick with anxious sweat. Morning light brought fragile denial. Surely, exhaustion had painted nightmares onto the canvas of silence. Pulling on his boots, Silas resolved to confront the trapdoor. Lacking a ladder, he improvised, stacking sturdy crates into a precarious platform. He pushed. The panel shifted but resisted, seemingly obstructed from above. Retrieving a crowbar, he wedged the tip into the seam and heaved. Metal groaned against wood. A few forceful shoves, a splintering crack, and the hatch yielded. Angling his flashlight's beam into the darkness, he hauled himself upward. The attic was a cramped, angular space beneath the pitched roof, a web of rafters overhead thick with dust and cobwebs. Stale air tickled his nostrils. A solitary window at the far end admitted only a feeble blade of light. Crates and forgotten trunks huddled in the gloom. His weight made the floorboards protest with ancient creaks. Then the smell hit him. A vile, cloying stench reminiscent of spoiled meat. He pressed a hand over his nose, fighting nausea. A few paces in, his light snagged on the wall. Scratch marks. Deep, ragged gouges clawed into the wood, unevenly spaced, suggesting a furious, desperate digging. Parallel fissures, long and brutal. His chest constricted. He'd never encountered damage like this within a building's walls. The putrid odor intensified near this violated section. A shiver traced its icy path down his spine. His breath hitched. Sweeping the flashlight beam across the cramped space, he spotted more gouges scarring the far corner. A sudden rattle from behind a stack of crates froze him mid-step. He gripped the flashlight, knuckles white, scanning the shadows. Nothing stirred. His pulse thundered, a frantic drum against the silence. A muttered curse escaped his lips. He remained motionless, listening intently. The silence held. Turning deliberately, he retreated to the opening, lowered himself down, and wrestled the trapdoor back into place. He stood there for a long moment, hands trembling uncontrollably. Ghosts, monsters, such notions had always belonged to fiction, yet something resided up there. A large animal, perhaps, diseased and desperate. A feral dog that had found ingress. The stench alone screamed decay. He needed help, animal control. But the village directory offered no such service. Inquiries among the few neighbors he encountered yielded only shrugs. One suggested a local handyman, a jack-of-all-trades known to occasionally handle pest problems. Silas jotted the number into his notebook, a flimsy shield against rising dread. That afternoon, he forced himself to work, clearing the cavernous front room. He wrestled dusty shelves, hauled out accumulated refuse, began arranging a tentative display of his antique wares. Anything to occupy his mind. Yet every glance towards the office door sent a fresh wave of unease washing over him. On a whim, born of nascent terror, he wedged a sturdy chair beneath the trapdoor handle. A ridiculous gesture, he knew, laughing nervously even as he did it. But the clammy dampness on his palms felt real enough. Each creak of the floorboards underfoot became a trigger, snapping his head around. Evening found him depleted. Canned soup, heated on a sputtering camp stove, served as dinner at the folding table. Darkness pressed in from the warehouse's unlit corners. He fumbled with his phone, seeking distraction, but the signal was a fickle ghost. Around 11, he prepared for another night, switching off the harsh overhead bulb, leaving only the small lamp beside his cot, casting a weak amber halo. Boxes loomed like silent sentinels nearby. He lay down, mind churning, and eventually forced his eyes shut. It returned. The scraping friction from above, slow initially, as if something immense dragged itself across the attic floor. Silas's heart leapt, his breath catching. He sat bolt upright, snatching the lamp, its beam trembling in his grasp. He wouldn't investigate, couldn't. He could only listen. The dragging paused. Then came a low, guttural vibration, a sound that raised the hairs on his arms and sent a chill skittering across his skin. A cold sweat bloomed. He fought the urge to cry out, terrified of what might answer. Questions swarmed. Animal. Human. Squatters finding refuge in the abandoned space. But the violence etched into the attic walls felt primal, inhuman. The memory of those deep gouges nauseated him. Sweat beaded on his skin despite the cool night air. A soft, final thud echoed from above. Then silence descended once more. He lay back, staring sightlessly at the ceiling, sleep arriving only in fractured, minutes-long bursts. His body taut, jolting at every nocturnal sigh of the old building. Dawn arrived gray and unwelcome. His muscles screamed, head throbbing. The handyman was his first call. A gruff voice informed him the earliest availability was the weekend, 4 agonizing days away. Frustration warred with fear, but with no alternative, he could only wait. The intervening days became a blur of sorting dusty inventory, scrubbing shelves, and consciously ignoring the intermittent scuffles and bumps from overhead. Daylight seemed to hold the presence somewhat at bay. The sounds were muted, less menacing. He gleaned fragments of the building's history from conversations with a couple of locals. An elderly man recalled the Corbins, the family who ran the general store decades ago. Peculiar folk, he'd offered vaguely, keeping odd hours, shuttering the shop unpredictably, kept to themselves, vanished years back. No one had taken over the property since. The roof repairs, the general decay deterred buyers. Silas pressed, asking about strange noises, attic disturbances. The old man merely chuckled, dismissing it with a wave. Old places always groan, he'd said. Small comfort against the vivid memory of those claw marks. On the third night, Silas attempted a different tactic. He positioned a small tape recorder near the office door, hoping to capture tangible proof. The flashlight lay ready on the table. Midnight arrived, and with it, the dragging cadence. His chest tightened, breath quickening. The movement seemed slower tonight, almost circular. A distinct scraping followed, the sound of nails or claws biting into wood. Hands shaking, he retrieved the flashlight and crept towards the office. He stood directly beneath the trapdoor, aiming the beam upward. Abruptly, the sound ceased. He waited, knees threatening to buckle, stomach churning, and then the stench descended. That same foul, putrid miasma he'd encountered in the attic. It clawed at his throat. He gagged, stumbling back, hand clamped over his mouth. A loud, definitive thump reverberated from directly above. He nearly dropped the light, swore under his breath, and retreated hastily to his cot, heart hammering against his ribs. He sat there, wide-eyed, braced for more. But only silence followed. Exhaustion finally claimed him near dawn. The next morning, he played the tape. Through the hiss and crackle, a distinct, low growl emerged, followed by the unmistakable rasp of scraping. His pulse surged. It wasn't a raccoon's chitter. It was deeper, more resonant. His mouth went dry. He wiped damp palms on his jeans. He saved the recording, a fragile piece of evidence for the handyman. Perhaps, confronted with sound, the man would believe, would help him face whatever lurked above. Solitude felt increasingly dangerous. When the handyman finally arrived, a stocky, bearded man radiating quiet capability, his composure flickered as Silas recounted the events. He frowned, but agreed to investigate. Silas stood back, a knot of relief and dread tightening in his gut as the man ascended the makeshift crate staircase and pushed open the trap door. He sniffed the air, his face visibly recoiling. Switching on a powerful work light, he hoisted himself into the attic. Silas waited below. He heard the man's slow steps, the creak of floorboards, a grunt of surprise. The handyman called down, confirming the claw marks, noting their unnerving size. Too large for typical wildlife. He poked around amidst the debris. A soft curse drifted down. He reported finding a crude nest fashioned from torn fabric and twigs in one corner. And something else. Something viscous, slimy, smeared on the floorboards. He didn't elaborate. The overpowering stench drove him back down after only a few minutes. He could set heavy-duty traps, he offered, but admitted uncertainty. This didn't feel like a standard animal infestation. He advised Silas to seek specialized help, someone equipped for unusual situations. Silas paid him for his time, watched the truck disappear down the quiet street, and the weight of isolation settled heavier than before. That night, Silas sat in the front room, gazing out at the darkened street. Weariness warred with a desperate need for action. Expel the thing. Seal the attic permanently. But the image of those claws tearing through wood gave him pause. He possessed no firearm, only the rusty crowbar leaning nearby. He ended up slumped against the wall, crowbar resting across his knees, flashlight clutched tight. When the dragging shuffle resumed overhead, he went rigid, breath held captive in his chest. He gripped the iron bar. The steps traversed the attic floor. The growling followed, initially a low rumble, then swelling in volume. His heart pounded a frantic rhythm. The lamp on his table vibrated faintly. The air seemed to acquire a distinct chill. Tension knotted the muscles in his neck. He yearned to shout, to challenge the unseen occupant, but fear paralyzed his voice. Fear of provocation. Hours crawled by, muscles aching, eyelids drooping with fatigue. Around 4 in the morning, the noises ceased. His shirt clung to him, damp with cold sweat. A bitter taste coated his tongue. He stumbled to the cot and collapsed, feeling hollowed out by stress and sleeplessness. He awoke near noon, forcing down dry cereal, mind scrambling for a viable plan. Boarding up the trapdoor felt futile. Those claws could likely shred plywood as easily as plaster. He paced the vast emptiness of the warehouse, nerves fraying like old rope. He stared at the silent phone. Who could he call? Who would believe a tale of monstrous sounds and impossible scratches in a derelict attic? They'd offer mundane explanations. Pests, structural settling. But animals didn't exude that soul-sickening rot. Animals didn't move with such deliberate menace. Weeks have bled in each other now. The antique shop remains a distant dream, its potential buried under layers of dust and dread. Setting up displays feels absurd when every night demands a vigil against the unseen. He braces himself for the sounds, the dragging steps, the guttural threats. The handyman's troubled expression solidified the conviction. This is no mere animal. How to evict it? The thought paralyzes him. Fleeing means financial ruin, abandoning the fragile hope this place represented. Yet, a morbid curiosity festers alongside the fear, a need to know what shares this space. He is trapped in a stalemate with the unknown. Thus far, it remains confined above. He remains below. But the sounds intensify with each passing night. The stench grows bolder, seeping through the floorboards, a constant, putrid reminder. He writes this now, hunched over the folding table, seeking solace in documentation. Midnight has passed. The odor of decay drifts palpably from the office doorway, coating the back of his throat. His hands tremble intermittently. He swipes at the sweat gathering on his brow. Outside, the village sleeps, oblivious. No one would hear him scream. The image of those deep gouges flashes behind his eyes. Warnings, perhaps, against his trespass. A reckless impulse surges. Grab the light, climb the crates, confront the darkness. But the thought conjures an unbearable image. The flashlight beam finding form in the shadows, revealing eyes, teeth, shape. And his courage evaporates, leaving only a residue of icy dread. His heart hammers against his ribs just imagining it. He hears it, now, dragging across the attic floorboards directly overhead. Louder tonight. The timbers groan under its weight. A ragged, throaty noise accompanies the movement. His pulse pounds in his ears, a frantic surge drowning thought. His hands feel distant, numb. He grinds his teeth until his jaw aches. The scraping, claws on wood, slow, measured, purposeful. What does it want? Why is it here? He knows only this. It will not leave willingly. The prospect of forcing a confrontation churns his stomach into knots. He cannot predict the outcome. But how much longer can he endure this siege? Trapped in this decaying shell with something aberrant, something not of this world. The chilling certainty grows. It's only a matter of time before the stalemate breaks. The house at 117 Hemlock Lane didn't just exhale dust and decay. It held its breath, waiting. It started there, amidst the stale air and the silence thick with neglect, the instant my fingers closed around a book that wasn't a book at all. What commenced as merely another task in my decade-long dance with distressed properties, a liquidation mandate for a bank, spiraled swiftly into a descent, a plunge into obsession's cold depths that would leave its stain on me indefinitely. My name is Elias Thorne. Real estate is my trade, the art of presenting hollow spaces as future homes. I'd navigated the eccentric legacies of the departed countless times, the hoarders' nests and the hermit's dens, but nothing forewarned me about Silas Croft's final bequest to the world. Housed within that brooding Victorian structure I first approached on a deceptively bright Tuesday. Croft, a recluse of considerable legend, had vanished from life without kin, leaving the property forfeit. My brief. Cleanse it, stage it, sell it. Simple. Externally, it presented the usual tableau of abandonment. Paint curling away like like sunburned skin. Gutters slumped into feet, a wilderness reclaiming the yard. Familiar territory. The key, cold from the bank's vault, turned stiffly. Inside, the air hung heavy, a tapestry woven from stillness and the scent of time itself. Clutter reigned, yet it possessed the specific gravity of a solitary life, ended mid-thought. Yellowed newsprint stacked like geological strata, shelves burdened with dust-furred curios, furniture sighing under the weight of unseen years. I moved through the dim rooms, charting the necessary exorcisms of junk and grime. The study yielded the first anomaly. Assessing a towering bookshelf, contemplating the sheer volume of paper to be purged, my eye snagged on a spine that sat too perfectly, its texture subtly wrong. It resisted the pull initially, then came away revealing its hollowness, a meticulously crafted facade concealing the unblinking eye of a compact modern camera. A chill, sharp and invasive, traced its way up my spine. Why surveil one's own solitude? Paranoia about intruders, I reasoned feebly. A flimsy shield against the gut feeling that this was merely the aperture opening onto something far deeper, far darker. My intuition proved horrifyingly astute. The subsequent hours became a grim treasure hunt. More lenses materialized, nested with insidious ingenuity. One peering from the tarnished brass of a wall sconce, another disguised as a screwhead in a ceiling rose, a third masked behind the faded pastoral scene of a painting. Each discovery was a fresh wave of nausea, a confirmation that this wasn't mere fearful precaution. This was calculated, pervasive violation. Yet the basement held the true heart of the malignancy. Its door, stubbornly locked, yielded to determined force. The stairs groaned their protest as my flashlight sliced the subterranean blackness. And there it was, consuming half the space. A nerve center that belonged not in a suburban home, but in some clandestine agency's black site. Walls shimmered with the cold glow of monitors, a constellation of screens wired to the network of hidden eyes I'd unearthed above. But the voyeurism bled beyond the property lines. Feeds displayed the quiet street outside, the windows of adjacent houses, glimpses into the private lives playing out next door. My hand trembled, the flashlight beam quivering across the scene. Filing cabinets stood sentinel along another wall. Pulling open a drawer revealed not mundane records, but obsessively curated dossiers. Meticulously labeled folders spilled forth photographs, handwritten notes, typed transcripts, fragments of overheard conversations, observations of routines. Silas Croft hadn't just been watching. He had been cataloging his neighbors, dissecting their existence minute by minute. Bile rose in my throat. This eclipsed mere sickness. It was a monstrous, sprawling obsession. I had to alert the authorities, expose this hidden theater of intrusion. But as I pivoted, intending to flee the suffocating darkness, my light snagged on something that punched the air from my lungs. A door, camouflaged behind precarious stacks of cardboard boxes. A portal utterly incongruous with the basement's layout. Every nerve shrieked retreat, urged me to scramble back into the light and never look back. Curiosity, however, that treacherous human impulse, held me fast. Unlocked, the door swung inward with a low, drawn-out creak that seemed to absorb all other sound. It revealed a space scarcely larger than a closet. inside, a bed. Small, starkly made, and equipped with leather restraints bolted to its simple frame. I staggered back, reality warping. This wasn't just watching. This hinted at capture, at imprisonment, at horrors I dared not fully contemplate. Had Croft held people here? Panic seized me, raw and absolute. I bolted, scrambling up the protesting stairs, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. Escape. Police. The thoughts were a chaotic jumble. Then as I reached the landing, a sound froze me solid, colder than any basement chill. The distinct click and turn of the front door lock. Impossible. I held the sole key. Unless Croft's departure from the world wasn't quite as final as the bank believed. Terror, pure and electrifying, surged through me. My eyes darted, searching for refuge, the bitter irony not lost on me. Trapped and hunted in a house designed for total observation. I slipped into a narrow linen closet, easing the door shut just as the basement entrance groaned open below. Through a sliver of space between door and frame, I watched a figure descend. Not the elderly Croft. This individual was younger, their movements possessing a stealthy grace that contrasted sharply with the house's decrepitude. A protege, an heir to this twisted kingdom. I held my breath, flattening myself against the musty shelves. Muffled sounds drifted up from below, culminating in the unmistakable electronic hum of computer systems booting to life. They were reactivating the eyes. Time stretched, becoming elastic and unbearable. Minutes bled into an eternity of suffocating silence, broken only by my own ragged pulse and the distant thrum of machinery. How could I possibly escape? Even if I slipped past them, the cameras would record my presence, my flight. After an age, footsteps ascended. They paused at the top, directly outside my hiding place. A moment of pure, crystalline terror. Had I been detected? Then, mercifully, the steps moved on, fading towards the front of the house. Only when the definitive click of the front door echoed through the stillness did I allow myself to draw a shaky breath. My legs felt like water as I eased out of the closet. Flee. Yes, report this. But not to the police. Not yet. Whoever had just been here possessed a key. Moved with familiarity. Might even have ties to the bank itself. I needed undeniable proof. Something concrete snatched from this house of secrets. With excruciating quietness, I crept back down into the basement's electronic glow. The monitors were alive, showcasing the mundane world outside and the silent, empty rooms above. Spotting a USB drive in a drawer, I jammed it into a port, initiating a frantic copy of files. Any files. It was then, glancing at the screens, that a feed from the porch light camera snagged my attention. Headlights sweeping across the curb, the same unassuming sedan that had departed minutes earlier. Returning. I ripped the drive free, abandoning the file transfer midstream. Up the stairs I flew, 2 steps at a time, the frantic rhythm of my heart drowning out thought. The scrape of a key in the front lock coincided with my reaching the landing. No time for strategy. I lunged for the back door, wrestling with its stubborn bolt as the front door swung open behind me. A final, desperate heave, and the rear door gave way. I burst into the tangled embrace of the overgrown yard, sprinting blindly. I didn't stop. Didn't dare look back until I collapsed into my own car, parked blessedly far down the block. As I wrenched the vehicle into motion, tires spitting gravel, a glance in the rear view revealed nothing in pursuit. Yet the sensation of being watched, cold and persistent, clung to me like the basement's damp chill. The ensuing weeks dissolved into a fugue state of hypervigilance and fractured sleep. The USB drive found its way to Lena, a contact in investigative journalism who grasped the potential gravity without question. A month later, the story detonated, a lurid expose detailing decades of methodical surveillance, predatory stalking, shadowed by implications of far graver offenses. The police descended upon 117 Hemlock Lane, but the phantom visitor had vanished. The basement command center was stripped bare, scrubbed clean of its technological sins. Without the fragmented data I'd managed to salvage, my harrowing account would have remained just that, a frantic, unbelievable story. Shortly thereafter, I walked away from real estate. The thought of crossing another threshold, of wondering what unseen eyes might lurk within innocuous walls, became unbearable. Even now, years removed, entering any new space triggers an involuntary scan for the glint of a hidden lens. The house on Hemlock Lane was eventually razed, replaced by a small, relentlessly cheerful park. Yet sometimes driving past that patch of green, the prickling certainty of unseen observation returns, and I ponder the other houses, the countless ordinary facades concealing similar darknesses. How many Silas Crofts are out there still, meticulously documenting our unguarded moments? The complete truth of that house, the full extent of its horrors, may forever remain obscured. But this much is certain. I will never perceive the weathered charm of an old Victorian through the same innocent eyes again. For I know now that the most terrifying monsters don't always lurk in shadows or under beds. Sometimes they reside within the very walls meant to shelter us, watching, waiting, their secrets preserved in the silent, impassive blink of a hidden camera. A single siren tore through the fabric of the night, a high, metallic shriek that ripped me from uneasy slumber. For an instant, suspended between dream and wakefulness, the sound felt alien, an acoustic phantom haunting the quietude of Havenwood Bluffs campground, sprawled beneath the shadow of the great reservoir wall. But the wail persisted, swelling, soon joined by discordant siblings in a blaring chorus of alarm, and the chilling certainty crystallized. No dream this, a nightmare given breath. 3 days prior, I, Elias, had sought refuge here, amidst whispering pines and the placid expanse of water held captive by the monolithic dam. Work had frayed my nerves to wire. Nature promised restoration. Havenwood Bluffs, overlooking the engineered lake, seemed a perfect sanctuary. Yes, whispers had circulated among fellow campers, hushed talk of relentless rains, of water creeping unnervingly high against the concrete behemoth. Concerns I'd waved away. Decades it had stood, an immutable feature of the landscape. Surely a little deluge wouldn't trouble it. How hollow that assurance felt now, scrambling from my tent into suffocating darkness. The sirens screamed relentlessly, interwoven with panicked shouts echoing between the campsites. My fingers, clumsy with dread, finally closed around my flashlight. Its beam sliced through the black, illuminating a scene of pure pandemonium. People surged like startled ants, some spectral in sleepwear, clutching haphazard bundles. Children wailed, dogs erupted in frantic barking, and over it all, the keening sirens insisted on the unfolding disaster. My light swept towards the dam, a vast silhouette against the starless void. At its feet, where placid water should have lapped, a monstrous turbulence churned. Water, dark and furious, spilled over the crest in multiple frothing cascades. The titan of concrete and steel was yielding. The truth struck like a physical blow. We were squarely in the path of annihilation. If that structure gave way entirely, the ensuing torrent would erase us in moments. Action, immediate and instinctive, was paramount. Adrenaline ignited my limbs. Back inside the tent, a frantic grab. Backpack, phone, wallet, a single water bottle snatched from the mesh pocket. Nothing else mattered. Emerging, I nearly bowled over my neighbor, Silas, an older gentleman with whom I'd shared coffee and quiet conversation just yesterday. His eyes were wide, reflecting the ambient terror. "Higher ground," he yelled, his voice strained against the cacophony. "Path up the ridge behind the sights. Only way." I nodded mutely, falling into stride beside him as we plunged towards the denser woods bordering the campground. Chaos swirled around us. A woman stumbled past, her face a mask of terror, dragging a shrieking child. Teenagers clustered nearby, frozen by indecision. And beneath the siren's unceasing cry, a new sound emerged, deeper, more terrifying. The resonant groan of concrete under unimaginable duress. The path Silas indicated was scarcely more than a game trail, a treacherous ribbon winding upward, obscured by night. My flashlight beam danced weakly, revealing loose scree and grasping roots. We lunged upward, stumbling, the uneven earth conspiring against us. Behind, the sounds of others following, ragged gasps, muffled cries of pain as they tripped in the darkness. Perhaps 5 minutes we climbed, lungs searing, when a sound like the sky cracking open obliterated all else. Even above the sirens, the shouts, it was deafening. Silas and I froze, instinctively turning back towards the valley. In the faint, ghostly illumination filtering through the clouds, I saw it. A vast section of the dam's heart imploding. Water erupted through the breach, an immense churning wall of white foam and black fury, consuming everything. The campground vanished instantly, tents and vehicles tossed aside like bathtub toys. "Climb!" Silas's voice cracked, raw urgency in the single syllable. "Climb, or the water takes us." Renewed desperation fueled us. We clawed at the incline, hands finding purchase on rough earth, pulling ourselves upward by exposed roots and the low-slung branches of resilient trees. The roar of the unleashed river intensified with every foot gained, swallowing us even the sirens now. I felt the ground vibrate, the very hills shuddering against the onslaught. Somewhere below and behind, a scream was abruptly silenced. I didn't look back. Couldn't. My entire existence contracted to the immediate struggle. The next handhold, the next straining step. Muscles screamed, lungs burned, but cessation meant oblivion. Time dissolved. Minutes, an hour. The world became tactile, elemental. Bark rough beneath straining fingers, thighs protesting each upward thrust, the omnipresent, terrifying roar of the floodwaters pursuing us. Then, blessedly, the gradient lessened. We staggered onto a small, uneven plateau, high above the obliterated valley floor. My knees buckled. I collapsed, gasping, my body trembling with a volatile cocktail of exhaustion and primal fear. As the frantic drumming in my chest began to subside, awareness seeped back. Others were here. A scattering of souls, maybe 20, 30 perhaps, had won the desperate race. Some wept quietly. Others sat rigid, shock rendering them statuesque. Silas stood near the precipice, a silhouette gazing into the abyss below. I crawled towards him, compelled by a morbid need to witness the devastation. What greeted my eyes would forever be etched into the darker corners of my memory. Where Havenwood Bluffs had nestled just hours before, a vast, churning expanse of debris-choked water stretched, reflecting the first, hesitant gray of dawn. Skeletal trees jutted from the flood at grotesque angles. Occasionally, metal glinted, the mangled remains of vehicles caught in the relentless current. The dam itself vanished, utterly consumed by the power it was built to restrain. As daylight asserted itself, the full panorama of ruin unfolded. The valley transformed into an immense, muddy scar upon the land. Here and there, rooftops breached the surface, lonely islands marking where farmhouses had stood for generations, now engulfed. And drifting upon that grim water, shapes I forced my gaze away from, yet couldn't entirely unsee. Stark evidence of the night's lethal toll. We huddled on that wind-swept ridge for hours that felt like lifetimes. Eventually, the thrum of rotors announced salvation. Helicopters materialized, their searchlights probing the drowned landscape. Rescue crews finally reached our perch, bearing water, blankets, and the promise of extraction. As strong hands guided me into a rescue basket, preparing me for the winch upward, I cast one final look below. The dam, symbol of permanence just days ago, was gone. In its place, a brutal testament to nature's terrifying indifference. A landscape irrevocably altered, mirroring the irrevocable shift within those of us who had survived. In the days that followed, the narrative took shape. Neglect, unprecedented rainfall, structural failure, dozens lost, billions in damage. Investigations were launched, blame assigned, solemn vows of prevention made. But for us, the survivors who clawed our way up that ridge with death snapping at our heels, no report could dilute the visceral memory. The sirens shriek, the waters roar, the desperate scramble. These became indelible parts of our being, stark reminders of life's precariousness and its stubborn tenacity. Years have passed. Sometimes still, I wake abruptly in the deep night, heart hammering, certain I hear the distant wail of flood warnings. Lying there, coaxing my breath back to steadiness, I think of Silas, of the others who shared that desperate ascent. Do they too carry that night's weight? Do they perceive the world through a lens sharpened by terror and gratitude? I remember those who didn't make it, names read in cold print, faces on memorial walls, lives extinguished, futures unwritten, all in the span of a few terrifying hours. And I renew the promise I make each time the darkness brings these ghosts, to live deliberately, fiercely, never taken for granted the solid earth beneath my feet, nor the gift of a quiet, unbroken night. For if that night taught me anything, it is the terrifying speed at which foundations crumble. And when they do, all that remains is to run, to climb, and to pray for the dawn. Barely a week had passed since the small house on the quiet street claimed me. It stood unassuming, nestled amongst brethren of similar modest design. My arrival was marked by the rumble of an aging sedan into the abbreviated driveway, the thud of boxes carried across the threshold, and a surveying glance across my patch of lawn towards the neighboring yards. An air of placid normalcy hung over the block. Houses neat, lawns trimmed, lives seemingly ordered. Only the dwelling immediately to my left offered a slight dissonance. Its shutters drawn fast, the grass whispering neglect, yet it barely registered. Some properties languish, I mused, untended. It was no concern of mine. That inaugural night, sleep remained elusive, the lingering currents of the move keeping my mind abuzz. Then, near the stroke of midnight, a sound permeated the thin wall dividing my rented silence from the shuttered house next door. Not the scuffle of nocturnal creatures. This was different. It was the unmistakable cadence of weeping, muffled, fragile, punctuated by hitches, as if someone desperately sought composure. Drawn from bed, I went to the window. Darkness cloaked the adjacent property. No lamps glowed, no vehicles stood sentinel at the curb. Nothing stirred in the visible gloom. Cracking the sash, I strained to listen. The sorrowful murmur persisted for perhaps 10 minutes before abruptly ceasing, leaving only the ambient hum of the suburban night. Swar. Morning light brought a quest for answers. I crossed the asphalt ribbon to the house opposite, rapping lightly. A man materialized, perhaps 50, clad in the uniform of unassuming Saturdays. A gray tee, worn denim. His gaze was level, his hair cropped close. Morning, I began, offering my name, Elias. Just moved in. I was curious about the house next to mine. A gesture indicated the dormant structure. He spared it a glance, brief and incurious. That one, he murmured, his eyes returning to me. Deserted. Years now. A frown creased my brow. But last night, I heard someone crying, quite distinctly. From inside, I'm almost certain. He offered a slight shrug, unmoved. Nobody's there. Owner cleared out ages ago. Must have been something else carrying on the wind. A stray cat, maybe. His disinterest was a palpable thing. A curt nod, and his door clicked shut. Later that day, tending her flower beds down the street, a woman in her 30s, athletic in shorts and sneakers, became my next query. After introductions, I broached the subject of the nocturnal weeping. Confusion clouded her features. Her account mirrored the first. Empty. 8 years, give or take. The reasons unknown. No strange sounds had ever troubled her ears. The remainder of the afternoon dissolved into the practicalities of settling, arranging the living space, positioning the television on its makeshift stand, coaxing the sofa into place, stocking the refrigerator's barren shelves. By evening, a semblance of order had emerged, yet the neighbors' dismissals hadn't settled my mind. What I'd heard felt undeniably real, profoundly human. A resolve formed. I would listen again. As midnight approached, I extinguished the lights, positioning myself near the window facing the silent house. Around 12:30, it began anew, a low keening, swelling slightly, soft yet insistent, undeniably originating from within those walls. The sound possessed a human rhythm, a sorrow too structured for any animal. Pressing my ear to the plaster, I imagined I could feel the vibrations. I silenced the air conditioner, amplifying the stillness. For 10 minutes, perhaps longer, the weeping held its desolate vigil, then dissolved back into silence. A knot tightened in my gut. This felt profoundly wrong. The urge to contact authorities flickered, yet what tangible proof did I possess? Reporting phantom crying in a vacant house seemed a quick path to dismissal. Still, the not-knowing gnawed. Tomorrow, I decided I would inspect the place myself. The following day dawned warm. Around noon, I ambled over. Tall grasses swayed, punctuated by weeds. Dust coated the porch steps. The welcome mat lay cracked and faded beneath the door, shedding flakes of old paint. Peering towards the front window proved futile against the tightly sealed shutters. Circling the perimeter revealed more shuttered windows, the house seemingly hermetically sealed. The front doorknob refused to turn, locked. An attempt to peek through the mail slot was thwarted by an internal obstruction. Silence reigned. No creak, no shuffle, no breath of occupancy. A single, hesitant knock echoed unanswered. Feeling conspicuous, I retreated. Around 3, noticing the older couple who lived to my right tidying their car in the driveway, I approached. Introductions made, I posed my now familiar question about the house next door. The man straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. His story aligned with the others, vacant since before their arrival 5 years prior. Some fellow left abruptly and never returned, locked up tight, ignored by all. Had they ever heard anything unusual? He exchanged a look with his wife before shaking his head. Quiet as can be, he stated plainly. Never noticed a thing. His wife nodded placidly in agreement, their expressions calm, faintly perplexed by my inquiry. Back inside my own 4 walls, I sought refuge and distraction, the television flickering with ignored images. The unease, however, clung stubbornly. That night, vigilance became my companion. I sat by the window again, notepad and phone at the ready, poised to capture evidence. At 20 minutes past 12, the familiar lament began, soft but clear in the hushed air. I activated the recording function on my phone. Rising, I scanned the exterior darkness. Nothing. Slipping out my back door onto the small deck, the moon cast long skeletal shadows. The crying seemed unaltered, definitely emanating from the neighboring structure. "Hello," I whispered into the night, the sound barely carrying. The weeping paused, a breath held captive in the cool air. Then, it resumed, indifferent to my presence. Retreating inside, I secured the lock and listened to the playback. Faint, distorted, yet undeniably present. The sound of human sobbing. Tomorrow, the non-emergency line. Let them check. It felt absurd, yet necessary. The call the next morning was fielded by a polite dispatcher. I recounted the recurring phenomenon, nightly crying, roughly the same time, from a house certified empty by its neighbors. An officer would be dispatched later to investigate, she assured me. Gratitude offered, I disconnected. Around 6 that evening, a patrol car idled at the curb. A uniformed officer listened patiently as I explained, jotting notes. He then conducted a perimeter check of the adjacent house, testing the door, rapping on windows. Finding no response, he aimed his flashlight beam through a minuscule gap in one shutter. Returning, he delivered his verdict. "Looks vacant, ma'am. Secured tight. Can't see anyone inside. Could be an echo. Maybe an animal trapped somewhere nearby. Give us a call if it persists." Polite, professional, and utterly unconvincing. Animals don't weep with such desolate regularity, do they? The timing, the duration, always the same. A new plan formed. Tonight I would close the distance. From the edge of my property, by the fence line, perhaps I could discern movement, a flicker of illicit light. As midnight descended, I donned dark clothing and slipped out, soundless. Across the dew-kissed grass I crept, halting at the chain-link barrier separating my yard from the overgrown mystery next door. A dilapidated shed slumped in the far corner of their lot. The house remained a dark monolith. Then, punctually, the sound began, clearer now from this proximity, undeniably internal. My pulse hammered against my ribs. A sheen of sweat prickled my brow. I stood frozen, listening. It sounded like a woman, her sobs ragged, interspersed with shaky, indrawn breaths. No words, just the raw sound of grief. The impulse to call out again lodged in my constricted throat. I remained a silent witness until, after its customary 10 minutes, the crying ceased as if a switch had been thrown. Back inside, hands trembling slightly, I splashed water on my face. The thought of forced entry surfaced, unwelcome but persistent. It wasn't my nature, but the unanswered question had become an obsession. If someone was trapped, hurt, they needed help. If it was something else entirely, I needed to know. Not for gain, purely for resolution. The next day involved a reconnaissance walk around the block, searching for alternative access to the neighboring backyard. A side gate existed, but a sturdy padlock secured it. The chain-link fence offered the only plausible, albeit risky, point of entry. Yet the pervasive indifference surrounding the property emboldened me. No one seemed to watch. No one seemed to care. Midnight arrived again, gloved, clad in a dark jacket, flashlight and phone secured in pockets. I slipped out the back door. Scaling the fence felt transgressive, landing softly on the taller, unkempt grass of the adjacent yard. Crouching low, I scanned the silent structure and waited. Right on schedule, the weeping commenced. It seemed to originate from the ground floor, perhaps the living area. Stealthily, I approached a side window, testing the shutter. Immovable. Another yielded the same result. The back door, old wood secured by a deadbolt, offered no welcome. Near the steps, a loose plank in the siding caught my eye. Prying it gently revealed a narrow crawl space, exhaling an odor of damp earth and decay. My flashlight beam illuminated only dirt and tattered insulation. No passage. The crying continued, softer now, but unwavering. My search led me to the far side of the house, where a small basement window presented an opportunity. A crack spiderwebbed across one corner. Tapping lightly confirmed the glass was loose. Wrapping a gloved hand around a small stone found nearby, I applied careful pressure to the fracture. Minutes passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the distant sobbing, before a shard broke free. Pushing the window inward, I directed my light into the abyss. A stark concrete floor, cobweb-draped shelves, the typical subterranean emptiness. Squeezing through the opening, careful to avoid the jagged edges, I dropped onto the dusty floor. The air hung thick with mildew and neglect. I stood motionless, listening. The crying was distinctly above me. Wooden stairs ascended into darkness. Each tread groaned under my weight as I climbed slowly, the flashlight beam cutting a nervous path ahead. At the summit, a door. The knob turned freely. Easing it open, I stepped into what appeared to be a kitchen. An ancient refrigerator stood sentinel, cabinet paint peeled like sunburnt skin. A table wore a thick shroud of dust. A palpable chill permeated the air. The locus of the sound was now clearly to my left, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I moved towards it, light preceding me. The living room materialized, spectral furniture draped in white sheets, sofa, armchairs, coffee table. Then, nestled in the room's far corner, a shape resolved itself from the gloom. A figure huddled on the floor, back pressed against the wall, rocking almost imperceptibly. It looked like a woman, jeans and a stained shirt, her only covering. Tangled hair obscuring her face as she wept softly into her drawn-up knees. I froze, the flashlight beam pinning her. She looked up, startled eyes wide, red-rimmed and glistening with tears. Terror radiated from her small frame. Raising my free hand slowly, placatingly, I whispered, "I'm not here to hurt you." She remained mute, staring, trembling visibly, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I heard you crying. I tried again, keeping my voice low and even. I live next door. Are you all right? Silence stretched. She seemed to shrink further against the wall. Taking a cautious step closer, displaying my empty hands, elicited a flinch. I halted. "I just want to help," I said softly. She swallowed hard, her voice emerging raspy and low. "Leave me alone." My mind raced. "Are you living here? Everyone told me this house was empty." She swiped at her nose with the back of her hand, her thinness and exhaustion starkly apparent. Evading the question, she simply repeated, "Go. Get out." Confusion warred with concern. She was real, flesh and blood. Perhaps a squatter hiding from the world, explaining the neighbor's ignorance. But the ritualistic crying, why? Stepping back, respecting her fear, I said, "Okay, I'll go. But maybe I could call someone, help you find somewhere." She shook her head vehemently. "No, just go." Her voice broke on the last word, followed by a racking cough. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Her fear was palpable. Pushing further felt wrong. Turning, I retreated through the kitchen, located the basement door, and exited the way I'd entered. The night air outside felt blessedly clean. Back over the fence, into my own house, the lock clicking shut behind me, felt significant. Sinking onto a kitchen chair, I noticed my hands were still shaking. Relief that it wasn't something spectral or violent, mingled with a profound, lingering unease. She was here, trapped in some cycle of sorrow, for reasons I couldn't fathom. The weeping didn't cease immediately. For several more nights, the familiar sound drifted through the wall around midnight, but now it held a known source. I made no further attempt to enter the house, nor did I contact the authorities again. A strange sort of empathy took root. One afternoon, I left a small offering near the fence line in my backyard, bottled water and a sealed bag of simple snacks. By the next morning, it had vanished. Though I never witnessed her emerge, I felt certain she was the recipient. I didn't try to communicate further. Gradually, over the following days, a change occurred. The crying grew fainter, its duration shortening. Then, one night, silence reigned. The next morning, inspecting the fence line, I saw faint impressions in the soft earth near the empty house's back door, footprints leading away. I never saw nor heard her again. The house resumed its vacant stillness. Life on the quiet street continued, the neighbors oblivious or perhaps willfully incurious. I held my discovery close, a silent secret shared only with the shuttered house. Sleep comes easier now, though sometimes in the deepest hours, a phantom echo of sobbing seems to brush against the edge of my awareness. A trick of memory, surely. The doors stay locked. My gaze avoids lingering too long on the house next door. I know what I found. I know what I heard. It happened. It's over. And a quiet gratitude persists that the truth wasn't something far worse. The sibilant hum of ventilation breathed through the dimly lit artery of the corridor, a lonely sound companion as Leo traced his final rounds. 2 hours past midnight, and Kronos Biosciences slept a strange, uneasy sleep. Months he'd spent polishing these floors, emptying the receptacles of discarded genius. Yet tonight felt different. A palpable stillness hung in the recycled air, thick as impending thunder, as though the very architecture held its breath. He, Leo, a custodian trading quiet hours for the funds to mend his sister's fragile health, could never have foreseen how swiftly his ordinary world would fracture, plunging him into a vortex of clandestine rivalries and secrets sharp enough to draw blood. This is the chronicle of that plunge, the story of an unraveling conspiracy that threatened to consume him whole. The night shift at Kronos, a titan in the vanguard of genetic alchemy, demanded more than just elbow grease. It demanded silence, sealed by stringent oaths. Their breakthroughs were treasures jealously guarded, and the pay reflected the weight of that secrecy. That particular night began draped in the mundane. Offices tidied, bins emptied, floors gleaming under his practiced mop. Routine frayed, however, as he neared the primary research laboratory on the 3rd floor. An anomaly. The heavy door, usually sealed tight, stood fractionally open, leaking a sliver of cold light into the dim passage. A frown creased Leo's brow. The lab should be dormant, locked down. Perhaps a researcher, lost in thought, had merely neglected a screen. Curiosity, or maybe just diligence, nudged him to push the door wider. The scene within iced his veins. 2 silhouettes, swathed in dark, functional clothing, hunched over a glowing terminal. Fingers danced across the keyboard with frantic precision. Data hemorrhaged onto a portable drive clutched in a gloved hand. These were no scientists he recognized, their faces obscured by ski masks that broadcasted illicit intent. A gasp, perhaps, or the scuff of his worn soul. Some sound betrayed him. Twin heads snapped around. For one suspended heartbeat, predator and prey locked gazes, mutual shock rendering them statues. Then, the tableau shattered into chaos. One figure charged, a blur of dark fabric, while the other scrambled to secure the digital prize. Leo stumbled backward, thoughts colliding like panicked birds. Security. The alarm panel pulsed red at the corridor's far end. He spun, launched himself into a desperate sprint, his own heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Heavy footfalls thudded ominously close behind. His fingers stretched agonizingly close to the alarm button when a hand clamped onto his collar, yanking him brutally off his feet. He slammed onto the linoleum, air exploding from his lungs. Gasping, struggling to pull oxygen into his collapsing chest, he looked up into a face defined only by the mask's harsh openings. Eyes, chips of Arctic ice, stared down. "You weren't supposed to see." A rough voice grated, low and dangerous. "Leaves us with a complication." Raw fear, cold and absolute, flooded Leo's system. Not common burglars, corporate phantoms. And he, the accidental witness, was now a loose thread dangling dangerously. Instinct surged. He lashed out with a foot, connecting unexpectedly. His attacker staggered, momentarily unbalanced. It was enough. Leo scrambled upright, slammed his palm onto the alarm. A piercing electronic shriek ripped through the silence, painting the corridor in strobing emergency light. Curses spat from the intruders. The thud of retreating footsteps echoed briefly. But safety was still an illusion. He needed cover, sanctuary, until help arrived. He dove into the nearest supply closet, burrowing behind towering shelves stacked with astringent cleaners and coarse cloths. His heart hammered, a frantic rhythm he was certain they could hear even over the caterwauling alarm. Minutes stretched into glacial eternities. He strained his ears, filtering the siren's wail for other sounds. Finally, shouts, the rhythmic pounding of boots, security guards converging on the scene. A shaky, incomplete sigh of relief escaped him. The immediate danger, he thought, had passed. A catastrophic miscalculation. As he eased the closet door open, a hand, swift and practiced, clamped over his mouth. He was hauled backward, stumbling into the darkness of an adjacent, unoccupied office. He found himself again confronting one of the masked figures. "Listen," the voice hissed, breath hot against his ear. "Listen very carefully. You tell security you saw someone running. Couldn't make them out clearly. Got it?" Terror was a gag in his throat. He nodded, a jerky, puppet-like motion. Good. The pressure eased slightly. Because if you deviate, we know the apartment. We know about the sister. Don't make us prove it. A hard shove sent him stumbling back into the hallway, just as uniformed guards rounded the corner, weapons drawn. He recited the fabricated story, his voice trembling, betraying a fear the guards likely attributed to the shock of the break-in. They seemed to accept it, a quick thank you for triggering the alarm, before asking him to provide a formal statement later. Watching them sweep down the corridor, a nauseating blend of guilt and dread churned within him. What dark pact had he just been coerced into? The remainder of his shift dissolved into a disoriented haze. He moved robotically, performing his duties while his mind raced, trapped in a loop of unanswered questions. What secrets resided on that stolen drive? How could they possibly know about his sister? What awaited him if the truth surfaced? Exhaustion warred with adrenaline when he finally reached his apartment building. Taped to his door, stark against the peeling paint, was a single folded note. Remember. Silence. The subsequent days became a waking nightmare steeped in paranoia. Every shadow seemed to conceal a watcher. Every unfamiliar car felt like a tale. He delivered his official statement to the Kronos security team, hating the slick feel of each lie as it left his tongue. Yet, as the company's internal investigation ostensibly proceeded, discrepancies emerged like cracks in thin ice. Key card access logs showed impossible entries. Security camera feeds from crucial moments were mysteriously corrupted. Gone. A cover-up, orchestrated from within, was undeniably underway. Swallowed by a sense of deepening peril, Leo resolved to seek his own answers. He transformed his nightly rounds into reconnaissance missions, lingering near conversations, his ears tuned to the undercurrents of stress and secrecy among the researchers. It was during one such clandestine listening post that he caught fragments of a hushed, heated argument between two scientists concerning the ethical precipice of their newest endeavor, something cryptically termed Operation Chimera. "We're playing Prometheus here," one voice whispered urgently. "The fallout, if this leaks. It makes the cloning scandals look like nursery rhymes." The complex scientific terminology sailed over Leo's head, but the terrifying core resonated. Kronos was nurturing something monumental, a project scraping against the very boundaries of natural law and moral reason, and someone coveted it enough to resort to violence, perhaps even murder. This fragmented knowledge presented a stark crossroads. He could retreat, bury his head, pray the storm passed him by, or he could pursue the truth, dragging himself, and potentially his sister, into the heart of the danger. The choice, ultimately, was wrested from him. Arriving for his shift the following evening, he found the third floor engulfed in controlled chaos. A fire, localized, suspiciously precise, had ravaged the main lab, incinerating vital research materials. Amidst the acrid smell of smoke and chemical residue, he overheard the CEO's grim pronouncement to the head of security. "This wasn't accidental," the CEO stated, his voice tight with fury. "Someone wants Chimera stopped or stolen. Find them. Use any means necessary." The realization struck Leo with chilling force. The stakes had escalated beyond corporate theft. Lives were balanced on a knife's edge, his own included. Over the ensuing week, he embraced the role of reluctant shadow operative. His janitorial pass became a skeleton key, granting him after-hours access to offices where he meticulously pieced together the puzzle. Operation Chimera, he discovered, was a revolutionary gene therapy protocol, holding the potential to eradicate hosts of genetic afflictions, yet simultaneously capable of augmenting human capabilities far beyond natural limits. A terrifyingly double-edged sword. The deeper he delved, the more tangible the danger became. The feeling of being watched intensified, no longer confined to the sterile halls of Kronos, but bleeding into his life outside. Twice, the same nondescript sedan mirrored his route home, just as the isolation and fear threatened to overwhelm him. An unlikely hand reached out. Dr. Eris Thorne, a lead researcher whose brilliance was matched only by a perceptible unease, intercepted him one night as he polished her desk. "I know you witnessed something during the break-in," Thorne began, her voice low, conspiratorial. "And I I've seen you looking. You're swimming in treacherous waters, Leo. She confessed her own mounting ethical anxieties about Chimera, her suspicion that elements within Kronos planned to auction the research off to the highest, potentially most ruthless bidder. I can help you bring this to light, she offered, her eyes searching his. But extreme caution is paramount. We are both under scrutiny. A fragile alliance formed in the shadows. Combining Thorne's privileged access with Leo's near-invisible presence, they began compiling digital evidence of the conspiracy. It was perilous work. Near discoveries left their hearts pounding. But finally, they amassed a damning collection, enough to alert the authorities. The night designated for their escape with the data detonated into pandemonium. As they moved towards a pre-planned exit route, alarms shrieked anew. Corridors flooded with security personnel and grim-faced men in tailored suits who moved with unsettling purpose. In the ensuing bedlam, Leo and Dr. Thorne were separated. He managed to slip through a side service door, the flash drive containing their proof clutched fiercely in his sweating palm. As he sprinted towards the distant sanctuary of his car, the sharp crack of gunshots echoed from the building behind him. A cold dread seized him. Thorne might not have made it. The days that followed were a maelstrom of flashing lights, probing questions, and ravenous media coverage. The story exploded. A pioneering biotech firm, world-altering research with nightmarish potential, a conspiracy worming its way to the highest echelons of corporate power. In the final accounting, several Kronos executives faced indictment. The company's stock value cratered. Operation Chimera's future hung suspended in ethical debate and legal battles. Dr. Thorne, thankfully, survived her injuries, lauded as a courageous whistleblower. And Leo. He accepted a substantial settlement, a gilded cage of enforced silence regarding certain sensitive facets of the affair. The money secured his sister's future, allowed him to build a modest business far removed from the sterile gleam of laboratories. Yet, even years later, the phantom chill of those nights lingers. He sometimes jolts awake, heart hammering, the scent of antiseptic and fear sharp in his memory. He learned in the starkest way possible that the most unassuming paths can lead into extraordinary peril, and that the solitary decision to act, to choose integrity over safety, carries a resonance that reshapes a life for